Any word on when he will be able to participate in the Shadow Council?
I'm forming a Shadow Council. This is not how you rule an empire. The man wants a cult, not a government.
What's up, meta nerds? Let's break down the Shadow Council, everything we know about its members so far, pulling from all these different canon resources, and we'll start by understanding the context from which it formed. Obviously, spoilers for all these books and the show, I guess it's even in the title and thumbnail, so back out before it gets worse. The story begins in 5 BBY, a year after the Battle of Endor. With the Emperor believed dead, the Imperial leaders were fractured and on the run, while the Rebel Alliance turned New Republic took over Coruscant and major shipyards like Kuat Drive Yards. Palpatine had a contingency plan in the event of his death called simply the Contingency. In his search for ancient mystical sites, Darth Sidious discovered the mysterious observatory on Jakku in 25 BBY, 3 years before the Clone Wars. The complex had long been buried under sand and rock, and he dedicated a team of droids to work endlessly to unlock this mystery. The orphan Gallius Rax would get a complete life video soon, but for this video, just know that he became a protege to Palpatine, and eventually Rax would be entrusted with putting the Contingency into effect. It's important to understand that the Contingency's goal was to destroy the Imperial Remnant. That might seem odd, but as usual, Sidious had this all planned out. He had long been perfecting cloning tech and Force essence transfer mastered by the Sith of the Old Republic era. Immediately after Endor, Rax would activate the messenger droids, the creepy red-cloaked bots with the pre-recorded messages spoken out of a holographic face of their late leader.
Admiral Versio, Operation Cinder is to begin at once.
Operation Cinder would burn important worlds that were now under New Republic rule, but also those still held by the Empire as well. Palpatine wanted to strip the NR of any boost that might come from taking over Imperial assets, and simply slapping their logo on it. Think of how Allied forces took Axis scientists into their own programs. Sidious didn't want something like that happening, but also out of a bit of vindictiveness mixed with a Darwinian approach to governments, ranting to Rax one day,
"If an empire cannot protect its emperor, then the empire must be deemed a failure. It collapses not only because its central figure is gone, but because it must not be allowed to remain."
Rax would make it seem like the goal was to unify the Imperial warlords and retake the galaxy, but the true goal was to rebuild in secret in the unknown regions. Sidious had essence transferred into a clone on Exegol, and had thousands of Sith cultists at his service. The Sith Eternal would continue the research into strandcasts, with the goal of perfecting something that even the Kaminoan cloners could not master, the cloning and refining of Force-sensitive beings. The holy grail of clone research would be to create designer Force-sensitives at will, but the Force would not yield. Darth Plagueis had tried to dominate the Force in this way, and it responded by giving birth to the Chosen One. Strand casting would try to graft different strands from a donor DNA, cast them together into one viable sequence in hopes of getting around this problem. You weren't making a one-to-one copy, but an artificial genetic construct, a hybrid specimen that was not quite identical, and this is what gave birth to Palpatine's lab-born son, the father of Rey, though he himself was not Force-sensitive. It also gave rise to the grotesque being that would be called Snoke. There were countless versions of Snoke that died off, and almost all strandcasts that were produced had some flaw that led to a high mortality rate. Snoke inherited this strong connection to the dark side of the Force. Sidious and the cult raised him to have absolute loyalty, and he would eventually be put forth to act as a puppet leader of those forces being built up in the unknown regions. This was all being worked on immediately after the Battle of Endor, while in the main galaxy, Gallius Rax was putting the Contingency into effect, hoping to burn away the remnants of the Empire, while rallying the few Imperial geniuses remaining to join him. The first recruit was Grand Admiral Rae Sloane, and she was tasked with recruiting Commandant Brendel Hux and his son Armitage. The inaugural meeting would be held aboard the superstar destroyer Ravager.
I'm forming a Shadow Council to govern the Empire from behind the scenes. Only the finest of our kind. The first and highest order of Imperial minds. Once Hux is on board, we will have our inaugural meeting.
At this time, the Imperial Remnant fleet was hiding out in the Vulpinus Nebula. The other known members were Chief Informational Officer Ferric Obdur, Grand Moff Rand, and General Hodnar Borum. Shortly after this, Rax would let his new council share their thoughts on what to do next. Most talked of a propaganda campaign to paint the Empire as a rejected but true king, the underdog overwhelmed by the terrorist rebels, hoping the galactic citizens would already be tired of the disorder. But Rax revealed that he had contacts in the Almagest, the Recluses Nebula, the Quilahan Nebula, the Rilu Triangle, and the Inamorata. That this combined remnant armada would be more than able to provide a decisive victory against the joke that was the NR fleet. Later, he would reveal to Grand Admiral Sloane that the intended target was the NR capital of Chandrila, homeworld of Mon Mothma. But the first step of the plan would involve Sloane presenting herself to open up peace talks with the new Chancellor. Talks that would also include leaders Leia Organa and Fleet Admiral Akbar. Sloane did not know that the true intent of her visit was to be a distraction, to get the NR leaders in one room with the ex-rebel prisoners that had surgically implanted chips in their head. The Imperial prison that once housed them was part of an experimental program to test the limits of controller chips. Like the inhibitor chips put in clones, this tech promised to flip on a behavior with the press of a button. These released war heroes were now proud parts of the NR Guard, meant to be symbolic of the rebels' triumph. But when Rax sent the code, the rebels started blasting away on everyone in the room. Sloane was there with her assistant Addie, as well as her retinue of royal guards. The guards surrounded the Grand Admiral and whisked her away towards her ship, while eliminating threats along the way. But Addie leapt out and tried to assassinate Sloane, only to be taken out by a shot into the assistant's chest. Realizing Rax had wormed her way into her inner circle, and was willing to use the most dishonorable means of attack she had ever seen, assassinations at peace talks was behavior only fit for rebel scum, she knew that she must take over the reins of the Empire. But Rax made sure it would be hard to track them down, and before she could make her return, Rax convened the second meeting of the Shadow Council, claiming that she had been captured by the NR, and declaring that he would be the de facto leader of the Empire as a whole.
I shall take for myself the title of Counselor to the Empire, serving as an interstitial leader only until Grand Admiral Sloane returns to us.
Then he started laying his trap, leaking intel to the NR that led to the destruction of many Imperial fleets, hoping to build an overconfidence in the enemy. For several months, the Imperial Remnant Alliance would call Jakku home, and with Rax as their leader, they felt compelled to follow his increasingly mad requests. Intense training protocols were pushed in the harsh desert world, which killed many of the troops, and helped Rax identify which of the Imperial leadership were worthy of being brought onto the next stage, the true goal of escaping into the unknown regions. Using Jakku to cull the Remnant, and even having a team of assassins eliminate Imperial brass, and eventually start taking out high members of the Shadow Council, with the plan being that the inevitable battle itself would work to fake the Empire's death. He made sure the NR got intel that the Imperial fleets were organizing over Jakku, and it wasn't long before they popped out of hyperspace.
Admiral Akbar is calling all Republic ships to Jakku. The whole Imperial fleet is there.
Meanwhile, Rax was with Brendel and Armitage Hux, as well as advisor Yup Tashu. They were heading down into the Jakku Observatory to take command of a replica of Palpatine's yacht, Imperialis. This would be their ride out of here after they initiated a self-destruct mechanism in the observatory, one that would be so catastrophic that it would explode the planet and destroy the surrounding New Republic and Imperial fleets. It was Palpatine's plan to ensure the galaxy was left in chaos. But Sloane did not take her assassination attempt lightly. All this time, she had been trying to get back and murder Rax. She had been tracking him down since the leaked intel, and rushed into the observatory at the same time as NR Special Forces operatives. Unlikely allies, each deciding that the enemy of their enemy was their friend, they worked together to find Rax, and eventually Sloane would be able to deliver him a painful death. Multiple blaster shots at close range into the stomach. He was writhing in pain as he told Sloane that if she truly wished to honor the Emperor, she would take on the mantle of the Contingency to follow through with the next step. Though the NR was able to stop the self-destruct sequence, she needed to take his place and follow the coordinates programmed into the Imperialis to a spot in the unknown regions where she would find the Eclipse Superstar Destroyer and its enormous fleet in waiting. From there, she would know what to do next. As he faded, Rax showed that he truly believed the Sith view of the Empire, that only the most powerful should lead, and all other were worthless.
I am undeserving. Just a skittermas, not of a war god. Outcast. Always the outcast.
Around the same time, Iden Versio was hoping to rescue her father, and what he says shows that he was one of the few deemed worthy of meeting up at the rendezvous point.
Rax expects me to leave too. This is where I belong.
Over the next 4 years, the Sith Eternal was shrouding its existence with layers of proxies, but ultimately was in control of the seemingly disparate efforts to advance cloning tech in this era.
Perhaps it's time we look to new leadership.
Project Necromancer is in place for that.
While Sloane would eventually come to name this organization the First Order, in part a reference to the First Orders given from Palpatine's Contingency, and the Imperial philosophy that to properly rule a galaxy, one must first have order, order being the prime principle from which all civilizational success follows.
That is our first order. To begin again, and to get it right this time.
Brendol Hux would become its first general, while Sloane still managed the general rule of the First Order and led the Shadow Council in efforts to vet imps in the Standard Galaxy. In this meeting of the Council in the year 11 ABY, it is possible that Brendol Hux is standing in for Sloane, like Captain Pellaeon standing in for Grand Admiral Thrawn. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Council is unaware of Sloane and the First Order. That for cover, Brendol is maintaining a standard Imperial fleet somewhere in the galaxy, and it must be large since he and Thrawn are clearly the ones with the most pull here.
We individually scrape and claw resources, awaiting the grand plan to take shape, while you and Pellaeon amass countless resources and equipment which should be shared.
Or the Council does know of Sloane in this major hidden operation. We're just seeing Gideon's frustration at being out of the loop. By around 16 ABY, Brendol was leading his son Armitage in the massive kidnapping project that would provide the future soldiers of the First Order, taking them from countless unmapped and often primitive worlds, and this is where they came across the woman that would come to be known as Captain Phasma. The ambitious Armitage would conspire with this warrior to kill Brendol, and it is possible that they also killed Sloane, because the Grand Admiral's fate is unknown, and nothing has confirmed her death, and with a skill to survive to fight another day, she very well may have escaped through the maze of hyperspace. But by 24 ABY, Armitage gets nervous whenever Phasma speculates openly about Sloane, accusing her of trying to blackmail him or somehow get him in trouble.
Sir, if I may say so, if Admiral Sloane were here...
Well, she's not, Armitage snaps. Any other threats you'd like to hold over my head?
From at least 24 ABY on, the First Order had come under the control of Snoke, a mystery even to much of the FO leadership, but his power was undeniable. He was being manipulated through the Force by Sidious from his throne world on Exegol.
I made Snoke. I have been every voice you have ever heard inside your head.
Snoke was a separate entity and had his own free will, but there was a constant and undeniable Force presence in his mind that, when combined with the loyalty instilled from that very first moment the strand was pulled out of its clone tank by the cultists, this genetic engineering, cult training, and dark side influence from Sidious left him as essentially nothing more than a puppet for the Dark Lord. Snoke was now the leader of the Shadow Council, but since they had let the New Republic believe that they had eradicated the Empire and achieved peace in the galaxy, to the point of even disbanding their military, I would assume that these council members became people like Rin Riven Dai and other high-level crime bosses and warlords that were receiving enormous First Order funds to spread misery throughout the galaxy. With Snoke's death at the hands of Kylo Ren, and the rapid acceleration of events in the final year of the First Order, with the destruction of Hosnian Prime and the Battle of Exegol being only 1 year apart, I think the Shadow Council died with Snoke, as Kylo was prepping to rule the galaxy, only to find the true master on Exegol, who proved his authority by showing him a vat of several standby Snoke clones that he had on hand. When Snoke Prime died, Sidious simply ordered the vat to be turned off, these strands drowning in their fluids, and meant to be evidence whenever Ren eventually showed up, that Sidious had been the true ruler all along. If you want to look more into this, a lot of this info comes from the Aftermath series, Phasma book, and Secrets of the Sith, which are all new canon material. Likes are the best way to help me out. Leave a comment, share, and subscribe, but most important of all, remember, beware the essence transfer, and the Force will be with you, always.